All right, we made it to the final theory for today, the social constructionist perspective. So, social constructs are something that you will hear a lot in psychology, sociology, and in social work. Let me move my little screen off the definition. And essentially, this perspective is focusing on how people construct meaning, a sense of self, in a social world through their interactions with each other. So, I think the video that you watch, the YouTube one, does a really good job kind of explaining the concept of social constructs, where you live in a society where we identify and place meaning on things that really might not have meaning to somebody else, but there's like collective norms. So I think the YouTube video describes like a book is literally a bunch of pieces of paper put together and given to somebody, and society has called it a book and labeled it something that's important for learning. The same thing with money. Money's value, legitimately, money is just something that's printed on a piece of paper with a design. But a social contract society has created is that money is valuable, and you utilize it for different purposes. So how does that fit into this theory? Well, basically, people construct meanings, a sense of self in a social world through their interactions with each other. And so I develop different meanings of or different perceptions of myself or my teaching style based on how I get feedback from students, or watching their cues of how they engage. If they're totally disengaged, I might perceive that I might build a construct that I'm not doing well in my teaching and instructing. And so when you're thinking about objects within a social construct, a social reality is created when people, during their social interactions, develop a shared meaning and a common understanding of their world. So one of the ones that often gets referred to as social constructs is when you're talking about definitions and expectations for genders. So a social construct is that boys like blue, girls like pink. And so at some point in society, it was determined that blue was masculine, pink was feminine. And interestingly enough, many moons ago, it was actually the opposite, where pink was seen as a masculine color. So through the process of, I don't want to say conditioning, but social interactions, that changed to the point where that's now associated with femininity as pink. And so some of those social constructs are currently getting challenged with a lot of the gender fluidity conversations and what's acceptable for boys or girls. We say gender neutral. What messages are we sending, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of an example of how social constructs can change over time. There's no singular objective reality, but there's multiple realities that are created in different contexts. And so this comes in because this is such a subjective concept that basically individuals are interpreting things based out of their own viewpoint in their world. So they're taking what society is constructing, but they also then adapt to what they believe as well. So I gave the example, I can't remember if I gave it in this class or in my individuals and families class, but talking about my individual who, through the symptoms of his mental illness, believed that he was the creator of Apple. So that was his reality, and based on it was kind of from a symptomology more so than society, but that is what he built his whole perspective on. And so he lived and operated and behaved out of that reality. Social interactions are grounded in language, customs, as well as cultural and historical context. So time does take a good play in this one. And people can modify meanings in the process of interaction. So it's not a very stable perspective. It's very fluid and ever-changing. So I liked this visual. So if you were asked to construct the meaning of the home, you ask 3 different people based on their realities, their social experiences, as well as what like the shared meaning is as a commonality in society. Somebody might identify these 3 different things as their home. So someone who lives in a rural setting might identify that there's a tractor and a barn. Someone who grew up in an urban setting might detail a home as an apartment without a yard and without open space. For somebody else, if they didn't grow up with a close-knit family, it might not have a relational aspect to it. It might just be a structure. Somebody who grew up in a loving, warm family could not separate home from having relationships. So same question was asked of 3 people, but each individual will construct their meaning based on their realities, their interactions, and the shared meaning within society. So strengths of this is it does look at the environment piece, and it does emphasize the role of religion and spirituality because it's taking in to consideration their values and different norms that impact how you see the world. Time and history are respected, and it does accommodate diversity because it's very open to individuals' interpretation of reality. So with that, the weakness is it's vague and unclear, and it denies having a one absolute truth objective approach. So this can kind of have some tension with religious beliefs as well, when religions and some faith-based situations have a very specific perception of the world and much more of an absolute thinking. There can be some tension with this. The vagueness, like other theories, make it hard to measure results because it's very subjective versus objective. There's not much attention to the biology of the person and the macro environment. It's very rooted in the psychology, so it kind of is a good introduction into the 4 perspectives we'll talk about next week. And there's not really much exploration on power relationships because it's very focused on individual perception. So it starts where the client's at, which is really helpful in social work. Clients are the experts in their situation. And it helps us understand and look at how clients view their situation and what they would like to see happen. And so there's this looking glass concept that sometimes individuals come into situations thinking, I am what I believe you think I am. So clients who might have some cognitive distortions or really low self-perception might be operating out of, I think you think I am a bad person, so I must be a bad person, and I'm going to project that assumption onto you. So then that kind of falls into cognitive behavior therapy, also narrative and solution-focused therapy, because both of those types of interventions focus a lot on clients' perception of the situation and assumes that clients are capable of change and seeing the change specific to their situations. So that is not quite generalist practice, so narrative and solution focus. It gets more into the specific clinical work, but it does tie into that big clinical picture. This one does pop up again in HIPSI 2. We talk about social constructs in there, so it's a good concept to be aware of in the immediate.